Hi YouTubers, I'm back for another YouTube video of what would have happened if this were in real life. Now, I've been busy as of late because, I have a lot of plans like this weekend. I mean, I can't say them, but, just very obvious. It's just, very complicated for me to come up with an idea and, it's just very obvious. One moment it would just make perfectly good sense. And seeing how I've already done the Penguins of Madagascar 2, what would have happened if this were in real life RhinoTMRTGamePlay series YouTube video, figured why not do Madagascar 4, the Madagascar 4 version. So, well, further ado, this is the YouTube video of what would have happened if the Madagascar 4 movie were in real life. So we cut open to the beginning. Alex, Gloria, Marty, and Melman, they're all enjoying their lives right after the third film, which of course you already know. Now this probably would take place after the third movie, as they would eventually head back to Africa, because that's pretty much the only place they can go to. They can't go back to Madagascar. They can't go back to the old places, they can't go back to every other place except for Africa, which kind of just makes sense. So yeah, so then eventually we get to see Alex, Marty, Gloria, and Melman. They're all enjoying their lives, and it's just very obvious. Alex and Gia are eventually married. They are eventually married in the circus, which kind of just makes sense. They would eventually, have a perfectly good time. That is until when they would. So here's how they would get to Africa. So Alex, Gloria, Marty, and Melman, they would all go to one place. They would go to Africa, and then they would come back there, with the circus animals, and which of course that is, and their goal would be to come back there. And then they eventually would run into the villain, who ends up being an old zookeeper, from the Central Park Zoo, which kind of just makes sense. I figured it would kind of make sense to make this kind of happen. So this person, he technically doesn't have a name, but I'm just gonna call him. I'm just gonna give him a name like the Zoo Animal Destroyer. I'm just gonna give him a nickname called the Zoo Animal Destroyer. So the Zoo Animal Destroyer, the train where Alex, Gloria, Marty, and Melman and the gang are going to Africa, they bump into them. They accidentally bump into them. They eventually check to see that the Zoo Animal Destroyer is actually one of the villains and not the good guys. So is one of the bad guys and not is a bad guy, not a good guy. So they would all eventually run back to the train, and then they would eventually leave. Then of course Skipper, Kowalski, Rico, and Private would tell Alex and the gang that person right there probably is going after them, and that, it doesn't concern them. Until sometime before the end of the movie, it will concern the Penguins, however. Here's what's going to happen, is that there's going to be a plot twist, so here's how I'm going to explain it. So, the plot twist is that Skipper, Kowalski, Rico, and Private are eventually stating that they are done with Alex, Gloria, Melman, Marty, and of course the rest of the circus animals. Seeing how they've already finished, seeing how they're done with working with them to put an end to some of the bad guys, and they say that they can do it all on their own, and that Skipper says that it's been an honor serving with the Alex, Marty, Gloria, Melman, and of course the circus animals. They eventually tell them good luck, and they eventually leave. The reason why I'm saying this scene is, if you do recall, this scene does seem a lot familiar, where Like, remember in Toy Story, a lot similar to that Toy Story 3 scene where leaves where Sarge leaves Woody in the gang with his two last people, and that they've already completed their mission. Yeah, I'm using that. I'm using that scene within this part of that. So then we fast forward. We fast forward where the circus animals are trying to find a way to put an end to the zoo animal destroyer, and they eventually would sing a song about how to get rid of their enemies, which kind of does make sense, seeing how it would seem, very necessary and all that, and yeah, it kind of does make sense. Now meanwhile, the zoo animal destroyer, who eventually remembers everything after being knocked out by the train. The zoo animal destroyer remembers everything, and now he has all of his memories back. But the bad news is that he's in Madagascar, so is that he easily. The bad news is that the water from the ocean actually transported him to Madagascar, and then Dubois from the and then the main villain from the Madagascar 3 eventually says, I can't spell her name, so I'm just gonna leave it like that. The two of them, they all meet together, and they build a raft to leave. And the main villain from Madagascar 3, the zoo animal destroyer, and the main villain from Madagascar 3's gang. Then the main villain's gang from Madagascar 3, they all eventually leave Madagascar through a raft right before the hyenas could, because the hyenas. Remember the hyenas from Madagascar 1? They do make an appearance in this fourth movie, but sadly they only appear for like a few couple seconds, so yeah. So what I'm saying is that so now you know what I say is what I envision. So yeah, meanwhile, Alex, Marty, Gloria, and Melman, they're all enjoying their lives up until when Skipper, Kowalski, Rico, and Private, they eventually return earlier to tell them that Captain Dubois, tell them that Dubois from Madagascar, that Dubois from the previous film, the zoo animal destroyer and Dubois' gang had escaped Madagascar altogether. So they would eventually all have to get ready. They would all get ready and all that. Meanwhile, Dubois and their gang and the zoo animal destroyer, they would eventually make it there. There would be like a fight scene or a fight battle scene involving using circus acts, you know what I'm talking about, right? Which kind of doesn't make sense. Well, there's actually going to be a death scene in this movie. There actually is going One of the characters is actually going to die. I'm not being specifically honest, but it might end up being like one of them. So just before, okay, so then we fast forward after that fight bell scene, which of course kind of does make sense with all that. All the circus animals are down, including Gia and her father, and of course I can't remember that other person's name. If you know, then help remind me, which of course is what I'm trying to say. So then, unlike that, in Madagascar 4, one of the characters dies and it ends up being Gio's father. Or remember that guy who didn't like running towards the rings. Yeah, that guy. That guy is the one who eventually dies, and the zoo animal destroyer eventually gets rid of him instead, because Dubois and Dubois' gang have been targeting Alex, but instead they accidentally but instead they accidentally go for Gia's father, which of course makes Gia sad, and Alex and Gia sad, and then there's, kind of very obvious, but you know what I mean, right? It's very, very obvious. So yeah, in Shepherd, Kowalski, Rico, and Private, they eventually tie up. They eventually tie up Duval and their gang, and of course, the you know, Zoo Animal Destroyer. They all get catapulted right back to Madagascar. So that they all get catapulted right back to Madagascar, where the hyenas eventually eat them, and they never get and then they are never seen after this point. Meanwhile, it would be sad to say that Meanwhile, it would be sad to say that Gia's father, or that guy who didn't like the rings in the previous film, eventually he dies. But he tells Gia, he tells Alex that he's a great lion that will forever go on forever. He also says to continue his legacy as the leader of the circus. So eventually, we forward it through a few couple minutes where Alex is the new leader of the circus, and where Marty, Gloria, and Melman, they eventually break up their adventures together, but they don't break up their friendship. Their friendship still stays the same. It's just they don't go on adventures, which kind of just makes sense. And then eventually, it all ends in an emotional ending, which kind of just makes sense. Yeah, and then in an after credits scene, we get to see that lady from the Madagascar 2. You know what I'm talking about, right? She actually returns back, stating that her real enemy was actually the Zoo Destroyer and Duval and her gang, and that she basically retires. What I'm saying is that she's nothing like that the lady from Madagascar 2. I don't remember her name. Is nothing like Duval and her gang, and of course the Zoo Animal Destroyer. Then they end the song with a very emotional song that everyone would like, and then the credits roll. And now this is actually a perfectly good idea. I mean, one of the characters from Madagascar 3 dying in the fourth film. Alex, Marty, Gloria, and Melman ending their adventures together, but still have that friendship of theirs. Skipper, Kowalski, Rico, and Private still eventually leave at first, but then they later come back towards the fight and battle scene. And it's actually a very great story, if I do say so myself. Now I know that DreamWorks obviously canceled Madagascar 4, but I think that this could be a perfectly good introduction. Now, perfectly good ending. Now, the reason why I don't feel like I'm today is because, like, why I feel a little bit different within here is because I'm busy and all that. So yeah, that kind of just makes sense. Yeah. And that's it for today. Peace out. Bye bye.